Hello. For the White Rose Philosophical Study Group, I'm Mark Freeman. For more information about the White Rose Philosophical Study Group or the Church of Illumination, please see the links in the description below. Links to videos 1 through 6 are also included. This is video number 7 in this series, wherein we discuss spiritual and philosophical concepts that can be applied to everyday life or any other worthy endeavor. Before we begin, we wish to make a correction. In video number 5, we said that Zoroastrianism was the ancient religion of the Babylonians. This is incorrect. It is the ancient religion of the Persians, or present-day Iran. Babylon was in the region where present-day Iraq is located. In our last video, we discussed the nature of consciousness and applied our definition to the universe at large, suggesting, for all practical purposes, that the observable universe is a living, conscious being. We also proposed that it is a spiritual entity as well as a physical entity. But before we begin discussing what we can observe, experience, or experiment with to prove that a spiritual plane of activity exists, let us expand a little more on what we mean when we say that the universe, or the oversoul of the universe, God, for all intents and purposes, is a conscious being, self-aware and aware of everything that exists from the macroscopic to the microscopic, as this being is in everything and is everything. We begin with a simple supposition. Suppose you had been born at a time when there was no such thing as a mirror. How would you know what you looked like? How would you be aware of your appearance? How would you be self-aware or conscious of yourself? You could feel with your hands that you have a body, but this simply implies separation of senses. When you touch your left arm with your right hand, you are feeling the touch in both your arm and your hand. If, for instance, your hand was completely numb, your arm would interpret the touch as coming from someone else and not you. In order to be aware of self, that is, conscious of yourself, there must be a separation of self to one degree or another. We discussed this to some extent in our last video using charged subatomic particles and a movie projector and screen as examples. Basically, what it comes down to is this: self-awareness, or consciousness, is only possible through interaction with one's self, either through reflection, that is, seeing a reflection of oneself in a medium, such as a mirror, or through separation of sense, as in the example of your right hand touching your left arm. In both cases, a separation of one's being is required. Separation implies potential difference, or interaction, which is movement or action toward establishing reunification, or the original state of being. From a religious point of view, this is much like the fall of humankind from the Garden of Eden and the subsequent history of redemption in order to return to our original estate. In science, it is very similar to the theory of the universe prior to the Big Bang, where all known forces were unified, after which they were separated, putting the whole known universe into motion and creating what we perceive to be as time. Therefore, when we refer to God as conscious and self-aware, it is in a similar context. God is first one, as a unified and time-transcendent being. Then God is two, physically time-dependent, as in the case of matter, as well as time-transcendent, as in the case of light or energy, separating into the spiritual and the reflection of the spiritual, which is what we perceive as the tangible world and universe we live in. And third, God is three, in the creation of an infinite number of self-conscious, autonomous emanations of him, her, self. Now, if there are those who are offended by our use of the feminine pronoun for God, we ask your indulgence as we will address this in a later video. For the time being, we are simply referring to two aspects of God, the masculine and the feminine, that are in truth united as a single entity acting in harmony with each other. All reflections are similar to the original image they are reflecting, but to one degree or another, they are also distorted. No mirror or medium of expression is perfect. Hence, no reflection can match the original. As we said in our last video, consciousness is the process of bringing the unseen into tangible manifestation, or the spiritual into the physical. One is the original, and the other is the mirror or medium of expression. And here we venture into the beginnings of understanding one aspect of the spiritual as compared to the physical. It is obvious, beyond debate, that the world we live in, this middle physical world of sensation and experience, is imperfect. No one could say that we live in an ideal world. It is an incredibly beautiful world, but far from ideal. Everything in it has its counterpart either in the imagination of God or the imagination of humankind, and everything we see around us and experience is the process of bringing the ideal of the imagination into physical manifestation, or its reflection upon the medium of matter, as in the example of the movie projector and the movie screen in our last video. Because our world is a reflection, it simply cannot be anything but imperfect. The ideal of the imagination is eternal. It cannot decay or pass away. Once created in one's thoughts, that which is imagined has nowhere to go to be unthought. However, every thought one thinks, no matter how constructive or destructive, no matter how kind or cruel, no matter how altruistic or selfish, every thought you think is a seed planted in the medium of plasticity that constitutes the tangible world, and as such, if continually nurtured through repetition, begins to grow until it becomes a physical reality. The only difference is that in the physical, once brought into full manifestation, it immediately begins to decay and fade. Now, this has some very sobering implications. The first is that every thought we think exists in the unseen eternally. Thoughts are things. Your thoughts surround you and continually manifest through your actions. The stronger the thought, the stronger the action. Some thoughts are so weak and of such a fleeting nature that they have little or no impact upon your actions. Also, a negative thought can be neutralized by an opposing positive thought, rendering them both impotent. They still remain, but are held in stasis. However, repeated thoughts energized by emotion or strong desire become the mission statement of your soul, and as such, the author of your life. That's worth repeating. Repeated thoughts energized by emotion or strong desire become the mission statement of your soul, and as such, the author of your life. This applies to both constructive and destructive thoughts, divine emotions and desires, and carnal emotions and desires. There is no getting away from this. There is nothing that God can do to remove what you have created without taking away your free will, which is God's greatest gift to humanity, and something only you can destroy, which is the greatest sin imaginable. Free will is your seal of freedom. To crassly dispose of this most precious gift is to destroy your individuality and to become a slave and eventually a non-entity. This is why governance of your thoughts in all things is paramount. This is why the great master said, "Love your enemies, store up treasures in heaven, do good to those who persecute you." Why? Let's consider the example of the movie projector from our last video. Remember what we said. The light from the projector represents the light of God, or the Christ light within you. The film through which the light passes is your thoughts, desires, and imagination. The screen upon which the subsequent image is reflected is the material, physical world. All negative, destructive thoughts and desires are merely images devoid of the divine light. They are dark, obscuring the light and creating dissonance in your immediate environment. If someone projects thoughts of hate and malice toward you, and you allow those thoughts to penetrate your being and return such thoughts in kind, you are doubling the darkness. Eventually, this becomes a vicious cycle until the darkness is so dense that the light cannot pass through the image, resulting in the heat from the projector's bulb, the divine light, melting the film through which it is attempting to pass, your imagination, your personality, your soul. This vicious cycle of hate and malice can be found on the macro scale among nations, the most perfect example being the Middle East, where hate and malice have become so intrinsic that the participants are blind to any other way of thinking. But the power of your imagination, your thoughts, your emotions, and your desires is just as effective in the positive vector. Thoughts of love, harmony, admiration, devotion, justice, desire to do the best one can in all things, and above all, the love of God, your Creator. Allow more and more light to pass through the film, your imagination, your personality, your soul, until you become like unto the light, or like unto the Father. And eventually, after thousands of years and many incarnations, you too can say, as did the Master, "I and my Father are one." This is the reason for the Master's statement, "Love your enemies." Hating your enemies hurts you, not them. This is not about weakly letting others abuse you. It's about breaking the cycle of hate and malice. "Ah, but wait," you say, "what about someone who is trying to kill you, steal your property, or harm those you are responsible for?" And this is something we will address in its entirety in another video. But for the time being, suffice it to say that negative thoughts, emotions, and actions of hate or any other destructive nature harm no one, ultimately harm no one, but the person who is thinking, feeling, or acting on them. Up to this point, we have been speaking of the unseen or the spiritual as a reality without giving any proof. So what in our experience tells us that spirit exists? First, let's define what we mean when we say spirit. What do we mean when we say spiritual? How can it be described? How can the intangible be defined using tangible terms? Perhaps the best description of spirit and the spiritual realm comes directly from the great Master himself. In John 3, Jesus says, "The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit." Unquote. The word spirit is derived from the Latin spiritus, which means breath or soul. In Genesis, God breathes life into Adam and he becomes a living soul. As the wind is unseen, so is all that is spirit. And yet, just as the wind can be felt and the effects of the wind can be seen, so too can spirit be felt and the effects of spirit can be seen. In fact, everything that exists in the tangible world is the result of spirit. It is spirit that brings life to the lifeless and animation to the inanimate. Spirit, in its highest sense, is the author of our emotions and activates our imaginations. Though unseen, the results of spirit are seen everywhere. You may ask, and rightly so, how can something unseen, unmeasurable, and ultimately undefinable be the primary cause of all things? Well, let's consider what we know to be true in the tangible world we live in. Because we live in a four-dimensional matrix, length, width, breadth, and time, we are used to the idea of something occupying a certain amount of space for a certain amount of time. But what about things that exist that occupy no space and no time? For instance, does an idea occupy space and time? Do feelings occupy space and time? Do thoughts, which you can recall at any moment you wish, occupy space or time? And what about those things that exist within the collective imagination of a nation, culture, or race? Is Santa Claus real or imaginary? Does Mickey Mouse exist or not? Does the love you have for your spouse, which motivates you to act selflessly for his or her benefit, occupy space or time? It is an axiom that anything which can influence something else is real. Let me repeat that. Anything which can influence something else is real. If it wasn't, then there would be no influence or reaction. So here's an example. Does the idea of Santa Claus have any effect upon people's actions? Of course it does. Billions of dollars are spent every Christmas in the name of Santa Claus. Does the idea of freedom of thought, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom to participate in self-governance have any effect on people? Of course it does. Hundreds of thousands have given their lives in the name of this idea. The unseen is the only realm that can influence the seen. The unseen is the only realm that can influence the seen. When scientists look for the cause of physical phenomena from other physical phenomena, they are basically looking into a mirror reflecting a mirror, which creates the illusion of an infinite hall of mirrors, enticing the scientist forward from one mirror to the next without any final answers. This is true especially in the science of particle physics, where more and more subatomic particles are postulated to explain measured phenomena, and yet these particles cannot be found even after billions of dollars are spent in search of them. And what of perception? This in and of itself is proof that a higher realm of spirit exists. What do we mean by this? Try and describe to me the color red. How about blue? What does green look like? You can say that green is the color of leaves during the summer, blue is the color of the sky on a clear day, and red is the color of ripe, red, delicious apples. But this tells me nothing if I'm blind and cannot see. Science tells us that color is simply electromagnetic waves of a certain frequency. We submit that that is how color is manifested in the physical, but that electromagnetic frequency is simply the medium through which color, something that exists only in the spiritual, is transmitted. And what of music? Why do we perceive certain vibrations of air as specific tones of the musical scale? Again, the vibrations are the means of manifesting the unseen, or in this case, the unheard, in the physical realm. And what of your imagination? Whether you accept this as true or not, what you imagine is just as real for you, in fact, more real for you, than any physical thing outside you. Everyone lives in their imagination to one degree or another, not in the tangible world around them. The tattooed biker with a leather jacket and Harley Davidson is steeped in a fantasy of rebellion and imagined freedom. The eloquent politician imagines that he or she is truly acting in the interests of the people and can somehow influence future events. The scientist searching for answers has already imagined what those answers should be. The young woman plying makeup and jewelry is imagining herself more beautiful than she is. The hunter with his gun imagines that he's developing skills that will allow him to live independently of society. The corporate executive imagines that the wealth he is accumulating will bring him satisfaction and happiness. The preacher or philosopher lives inside the ideas of his religion or philosophy, and is often naively unaware of the human world around him. Even the clothes we all wear are based on an imagined idea of beauty rather than practicality. Consider the uniformed soldier with the many medals on his chest and the unusual hat he is wearing. Does this serve a practical purpose? Or is it for imagined reasons that this uniform exists? The style of home we build, the art we prefer, the music that moves us, all of it lives inside our imagination. You cannot perceive, understand, or appreciate anything that does not already exist in some form in your imagination. Repeating that. You cannot perceive, understand, or appreciate anything that does not already exist in some form in your imagination. Since it is impossible for most individuals to travel back in time and witness events, all of history is imagined based upon fragmented information. Every news article you read or hear on the radio or see on your television, computer, or smartphone lives in your imagined idea of the facts and events rather than the actual reality, because even witnesses to the same event remember it happening differently. Every Christian on planet Earth has an imagined idea of what Jesus the Christ looks like, what his voice sounds like, and how he would act in any situation. Yet not a single one of those imagined characteristics are identical. Every person imagines him differently. Why? Because all of us see the world, people, and events around us as we are, not as they actually are. If you were able to go back in time and actually meet Jesus when he was incarnate here on earth 2,000 years ago, you might find yourself to be disappointed, because he's been back several times since then, and the world did not recognize him or acknowledge him. His last incarnation was 216 years ago, but that is a subject for another video. Our point here is this. There is far more that is unseen in the world we live in than there is the seen. This opens up the possibility for an endless exploration into that world where entities exist that are as of yet beyond most people's comprehension. It also opens the door into a realm where the mundane affairs of human life take a back seat in your inner life and give you freedom from worry, anxiety, and stress. At this point in your lives, most of you are only aware of the people in the world you live in. You believe in God, but God often seems absent from your life. You are beset with constant corporate, political, and media images of what you should buy, what you should believe, how you should behave, how much money you should be earning, what is acceptable in society and what is not. These are all voices coming in their own name, and not in the name of divine love, peace, goodwill, and cooperative harmony. Now, these corporate voices that I just named are not evil in and of themselves. These corporate voices are not evil in and of themselves. They are only evil if you allow them to influence your conscience and your common sense. They are only evil if you allow them to influence your imagination. Because you see, your imagination is your personal universe that belongs exclusively to you. You have the power to allow only what you want in your universe and not what someone else thinks you should allow. You have the power to allow only what you want in your universe and not what someone else thinks you should allow, usually for that someone else's personal gain at your expense. So, how does one begin to develop a greater spiritual and imaginative life? Well, that will be the subject of our next video. Thank you, as always, for sharing your time with me, and remember, life is a magnificent adventure. Never stop learning.